it's not really about trade, is it?
Not primarily, no. It looks much more like it's about a fundamental strategic vulnerability. It seems like, maybe for the first time, a major global player has taken these really explicit steps. Steps designed to make it harder for the U.S. and its allies to replenish their weapons stockpiles.
Which is a whole different ballgame than just tariffs. It's a classic case of misdirection, really. That narrative that the trade war was just getting worse, it completely sidesteps the huge defense implications.
Right.
Sure, China maybe gained some economic leverage, but the serious problem, the one that's, probably causing some sleepless nights in Washington, that was flagged pretty clearly in analysis from places like CSIS.
So the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They pointed out how these new rare earth magnet restrictions are a direct threat to U.S. defense supply chains.
And what's fascinating here, like you said, is how it's being framed, as this economic spat, when really it looks more like a serious national security, well, maybe checkmate is too strong, but a serious check.
It's a significant move, yeah. And think about the timing. For the past few years, everyone knows the U.S. and NATO have been sending a lot of weapons overseas, drawing down their own stockpiles.
Especially munitions.
Right. And sources are confirming that the U.S. military itself realized it had a pretty severe internal production problem, a supply problem. They were running low on key stuff.
They needed to ramp up fast.
Exactly. They needed to boost production yesterday. And that's the precise moment China introduces these rules. It just makes that critical production increase much, much more difficult.
Okay, so
yeah, the specificity is where the strategic lock really comes in. The regulations apply to foreign-produced rare earth magnets and also some specific semiconductor materials.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. They apply if those items contain at least 0.1% heavy rare earth elements that were sourced from China.
Wait, hang on. 0.1%. That sounds incredibly small. What does that practically mean for a company making something outside China?
It means almost all high-performance components used in defense, pretty much worldwide, are now caught in this net.
Because China dominates the supply.
Completely dominates it. You have to remember the numbers. China handles roughly 70% of global rare earth mining. Okay, significant. But then 90% of the separation and processing needed to make them usable. 93% of the world's actual magnet manufacturing relies on their processed materials. So if you're making an advanced component, it doesn't matter if it's assembled in, Seoul or Germany or Seattle, if it has even that tiny trace of Chinese processed heavy rare earths,
Which
falls under Beijing's new licensing control. You need their permission. China is using the Foreign Direct Product Rule, the FDPR.
FDPR, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. It should. The U.S. introduced it way, way back in 1959. So Beijing is essentially saying, look, we're just applying this rule, restricting what other countries can make using our source materials as a, quote, normal tool. They stated the measures target dual-use items, things with both civilian and military applications.
Right.
The official announcement said these actions were necessary because certain foreign entities were, and I'm quoting loosely here, transferring Chinese origin-controlled rare earth items to entities involved in military or other sensitive fields.
Wow.
And that this activity caused, again quoting, serious harm or potential threats to China's national security and interests. They're regulating based on where the stuff ends up, specifically targeting weapons applications.
And they did make a point of saying it's out of ban, right?
Correct. They emphasize these are export controls, not export bans. They said licenses will still be granted for legitimate civilian uses. Humanitarian stuff like medical equipment or disaster relief is explicitly exempt. This is where it gets really concerning from a defense perspective. We're talking about absolute core U.S. military capabilities. Analysis points to things like the F-35 fighter jets.
The backbone of future air power for the U.S. and allies.
Exactly. Then you have the Advanced Virginia and Columbia-class submarines. Critical undersea platforms, Tomahawk missiles, their guidance systems rely on these materials.
Cruise missiles, yeah.
Key radar systems, Predator drones, the unmanned aerial vehicles, and also the JDAMs, the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, those highly accurate smart bombs. Curtailing the production, or even just the maintenance and replacement parts for those items, that potentially gives Beijing a profound strategic lever, almost a veto, over U.S. military readiness. Well, first, when the U.S. reacted, angrily, threatening those big tariffs, China shot back, pointing out what they call a textbook double standard. They highlighted the huge difference between the U.S. control list over 3,000 items and their own dual-use list, which is much smaller, around 900 items. So it's Washington in an awkward spot. criticizing a tool they pioneered and have used extensively themselves, like, restricting chip exports to China using that very rule. Helium is actually critical for a lot of really cutting-edge tech. We're talking quantum computing, advanced rocketry, MRI machines in hospitals, and crucially, the sophisticated lithography needed for making advanced semiconductors.
Okay, much more important than party balloons.
Much more. And until very, very recently, China had a massive strategic weak spot here. Back in 2022, they imported something like 95% of their heat percent from the US. That meant Washington essentially held a trump card. They could, theoretically, turn off the helium tap and cause serious problems for China's high-tech and defense sectors. Certainly did. But China, well, they appear to have done their homework. They identified this vulnerability and went all in on diversifying their helium sources and boosting domestic production.
And did it.
Late 2024, China had managed to slash its dependence on U.S. helium imports down to less than 5%.
Wow. From 95% down to under 5%. That's a massive shift in a short time.
It really is. So the thinking goes, they effectively neutralized their own exposure. They insulated themselves from a potential U.S. countermove before they pulled the trigger on these rare earth controls. It highlights the difference, perhaps, between a great power that can secure its own needs and insulate itself versus others who remain vulnerable. China seems to be signaling confidence not just in its rare earth dominance, but also in its ability to withstand the fallout, because it believes it has secured what it needs for its own top priorities.
Listening is pretty clear. This isn't just another trade spat. It looks like a deliberate shift by China, moving beyond just economic leverage. They seem to be directly challenging U.S. and allied war-making capability by hitting the ability to produce and maintain critical systems like F-35s, submarines, smart bombs. It's less about economics, more about strategic independence and leverage.
It changes the strategic landscape, potentially.
It absolutely forces a recalculation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A recalculation of strategic readiness. If the U.S. and its partners can no longer just assume they can quickly replenish key weapon stockpiles, well, the really big question for you to think about is this. Will this stark vulnerability finally force Washington to commit, to undertake that massive, incredibly expensive, politically challenging task of building a truly independent, end-to-end rare earth supply chain from mining to magnets completely outside of China's control? That's the multi-billion-dollar question left hanging.